Before we get on with the video, do me a favor and hit the like button. It greatly helps out the channel. Now back to the video. The world had fallen. The city that was once full of lights and voices has now been engulfed by flames and buried in darkness. Corpses trampled the ground wherever you looked, and rats scavenged through the corpses for something to eat. There was nothing left in this world. And amidst the flames and debris from the destroyed buildings, we see a man that had struck his spear through the heart of another. The man with the spear held his weapon in his hands tightly, and in a tone of anger, this man demanded this person, the heavenly demon, to explain why he had to kill every living thing. The heavenly demon was dead. This vexed the man, and he shouted the heavenly demon's name. This man could not forgive the heavenly demon for destroying the world. Suddenly the heavens began to glow brightly, and this man, Li Shinhak, heard a voice praising him for doing a great work as a hunter. Li turned his angry gaze towards the voice, and before him was a beautiful woman who emitted an elegant glow. Li recognized her and he called her by name. The goddess of harps Vega expressed to Li that the heavenly demon was dead, and Li had saved the world. Li, with his head lowered, questioned why Vega was praising him for saving the world. Li looked up and he called Vega's statement bullshit, and as tears streamed down his face, he questioned how this could be considered salvation. He expressed that everything died in the hands of that fucker, the heavenly demon. More than 10 years ago, one day out of nowhere, gates that connected the outer world to this world appeared everywhere. Unknown monsters swarmed out of those gates and instantly turned the world into a living hell. Just when more than half of the world was swarmed by monsters, transcendent beings known as constellations appeared. The constellation bestowed upon humans stigma and gave them the power to fight monsters. That was the birth of star-enlightened people, and they were known as metahumans. Metahumans became the hope of humanity, and the world seemed to have a chance of regaining its light. Until he appeared. The demon of the heavens, Kwanogen. At first he was a normal metahuman, but along with the power of the metahuman stigma, he also had the power of the black heavens, which could absorb even constellations, the owners of the stigmas. With this power he began to grow stronger rapidly. In order to kill that tremendous monster, the heavenly demon, thousands of metahumans worked together, and even the constellations that were always competing with one another joined forces. However, that fucker was able to single-handedly trample and shred those thousands into pieces, and he even devoured the constellations. Li explained to Vega that everyone, from the kind apostles, the brave warriors, and the noble constellations, all of them without leaving a single one behind, died at the hands of that monster, and in the end Earth was turned into the star of the end. Vega expressed that in the end the demon of the heavens died, and she says Li should rejoice because he was the one who killed the heavenly demon. And to him who saved the world by killing the heavenly demon, she would grant him one wish via the Star of Oaths. Her elegant glow grew, and shifting gears appeared behind her. The Star of Oaths is something only the constellations of the North Star can use, and it's an oath that grants any wish. If that was the case, Li expressed that he is going to reverse everything. He stood, and with a determined aura about him, he asked Vega to send him back in time. Vega glared at him nervously, and she questioned if Li really plans to regress. She questioned if Li wanted to live through this same cruel history again, and she explained that if he regressed, the future of that world could be even more painful or full of despair. Li said that he knows, but he was certain that things would be different this time around. A regressor, a person who goes against the fate of the world, and the only ones who can rewrite history with an end set in stone. Li placed his hand on his chest, and he expressed passionately that he will be sure to change this fucked ending. Vega stared at Li with a blank stare. She didn't say a word, she just thought about what Li just said. And after a short while, she agreed to send Li back in time with the wish. Before she could begin, Li interrupted to ask for one more thing. This wasn't a wish but Li's proposition to Vega. He asked her to bestow the stigma of the Vega star on him. This shocked Vega. She reminded Li that no human could withstand her stigma, which is why even the heavenly demon couldn't obtain her stigma. She expressed that not even Li, the savior, would be able to withstand her stigma. Li told Vega that if he can't do that, then there will be no point in him going back in time. He looked up at Vega, questioning if she hadn't realized this. This left Vega deep in thought, and shortly after she agreed to send Li back in time with her stigma. The shifting gears behind her started to move again, and she expressed to Li that the moment he goes back to the past, she would bestow the stigma of the Vega star on him, and she would make note to look for him personally. Li, in a shocked tone, questioned if Vega wouldn't lose her memories when he goes to the past. Vega explained that she will indeed lose her memories of this timeline, but Li would have her stigma, and the past her would be able to quickly recognize that Li is a regressor. And if Li is able to withstand her stigma, then it's likely her past self will take Li in as her disciple. Li was in disbelief to think he would become the disciple of the Vega star, one of the North Stars, and to think the very thing that many metahumans wanted would happen to him. With this, all the preparations were complete. He looked back at the heavenly demon, making sure to make note of his face. There are tons of ways for him to find out where the heavenly demon first registered as a metahuman. He just needs to wait and find him, and this time he will make sure to kill the heavenly demon who took everything away from him early on. Shortly after, Vega announced that the oath was ready and she would exercise the oath now. And as the gears behind her began to shift quicker, Lee looked up admiring the elegant light. The things he lost, the things he failed to protect, and the numerous regrets he pondered upon over and over again, this time he will definitely change them. Lee's body was engulfed by the elegant light, and as he was being sent back in time, he received a system notification informing him that he had been bestowed with the Vega Star's stigma. And since he was bestowed that stigma, his existing Pyxis stigma was starting to disappear. Suddenly he received multiple messages warning him that the power of the Vega Star's stigma was too powerful. This was incredibly painful for him, however, he was able to endure it by thinking about his brother, who was killed by the heavenly demon, even though he was strong enough to be chosen by one of the 12 zodiacs. He recalled himself, kneeling in front of the heavenly demon, questioning why he had to kill his brother, and with a cold expression, the heavenly demon replied saying if Lee wouldn't have left him back then, this wouldn't have happened. Suddenly Lee started to question if he had seen the face of the heavenly demon before. He received another warning that he had entered a state of energy deviation. While he was deep in thought trying to recall where he had seen the heavenly demon's face, he heard a voice questioning why he was acting like this all of a sudden. Lee recognized the voice. He turned around to see this person asking if he was alright. Lee was in disbelief. The man in front of him was the heavenly demon. Lee was in an emotional state, and he started questioning why the heavenly demon was suddenly in front of him. He received a notification telling him that due to his huge emotional fluctuation, his energy deviation worsened, and Lee started coughing up blood. However, Lee couldn't help it. He continued to question why the heavenly demon was suddenly in front of him. His energy deviation continued to worsen, and it caused the stigma of the Vega Star to go berserk. He was informed that his body had completely fallen apart. Lee, now realizing that this isn't the time to be freaking out, tried to reel his emotions in so he could withstand this. But he received another notification informing him that he had fallen into critical condition. In that moment, Lee recalled Vega telling him that the chances of surviving her stigma is 1 in 1,000. Lee's eyes began to close. In the end, he didn't become that one probability, and shortly after he died. The heavenly demon, Kwon Oh-jin, stared at Lee's dead body in disbelief. He screamed out in a panic saying if Lee was going to die, he should have died after he killed all the monster that was surrounding them. He grabbed a stick close to him, and he stood questioning how he should fight the monsters when he's not even a meta-human. He damned Lee for dying at such a time. Kwon started looking through Lee's body to see if he had anything on him. To calm his nerves, he expressed to himself that Lee is a metahuman, so he wouldn't be stupid enough to come in with nothing but a useless stigma. He reached Lee's chest, and he noticed a stigma marking. However, it was a marking he had never seen before, and as he observed the stigma, he received a message from the system telling him that the Black Heaven's first enlightenment was beginning. Kwon stared at the message questioning what it was. He received another message informing him that the Vega Star's stigma had been completely absorbed. Suddenly, Kwon's body was hit with immense pain, like he was struck by lightning. He received another message informing him that the absorbed stigma was too powerful. Kwon screamed out in pain questioning why this was happening to him. He received another message informing him that the power of the stigma he absorbed has been adjusted to match the enlightenment, and if it was, he questioned why he could see it when the system window is something only metahumans can see. He looked at his chest, and he saw that same mark that was on Lee's chest previously. Suddenly, Vega appeared in front of him. Vega expressed that she came because she felt the power of her stigma here, and to end, and since he has her stigma, she concluded that he must be a regressor. Kwon stared at Vega wondering what she was talking about. He wondered how he could be a regressor when he never regressed. The only goal is really simple. All Kwon has to do is show them what they want to see, and let them hear what they want to hear. The orphanage manager's smile grew, and he questioned if Kwon understood what he was saying, and if Kwon would be able to do what he just said. Kwon smiled, and he proceeded to give the orphanage manager the middle finger, stressing that the orphanage is a good place. This vexed the orphanage manager. He laughed saying he has been too nice with Kwon. But it seems Kwon wants to die today. Suddenly, a little girl appeared behind the orphanage manager. The little girl expressed that the orphanage manager shouldn't be bullying Kwon to the ground, and the little girl grabbed Kwon's hand and she began leading him to the door. The orphanage manager called out. He told them to wait where they were. The little girl questioned why they should wait. She turned to Kwon and with a pleasant smile she asked him if he was okay. This 10-year-old girl is Song Hyun, and she was Kwon's only support, and was the only person who helped Kwon endure this hellish orphanage. Remember making up his mind to not allow himself to die a shit death in a place like this. He questioned if it was from that moment on that he decided to be a scammer. When gates opened on Earth, monsters that humans had never heard of before appeared. But even when Earth became hell, constellations, who possessed the pets, he did this because it was so much easier to survive among the metahumans. Like a leech, he leeched off of others, he fooled the metahumans, and he made huge gains. Quan would pretend to be a high-ranking metahuman, and he created a party and he pretended to help them. Afterwards he would take a decent amount of the rewards, and he ran away. He became the perfect conman. Quan started to recall how his day started, which started like any other day. He approached a random metahuman to scam them. That metahuman was Li Shinhuk. Li was shocked because Quan informed him that he is a disciple of Aquarius, one of the 12 astrological signs. Quan smiled, and he told Li that there is no reason to be surprised. He scratched behind his head while expressing in an embarrassed tone that even though he is one of the 12 astrological signs disciples, he is still level 1. Li informed Quan that he is the disciple of Pyxis, so compared to Quan he is nothing. Quan with an enthusiastic tone gave Li a compliment. He expressed that Li has the stigma that controls orientation and direction, and no matter what weapon Li uses, for him it will feel like he was using his own hands and feet. Li laughed, and he told Quan that it's not really like Thaw. Quan smiled, he knows that he has Li in his trap. Right then and there he decided that Li was his prey, so he got started by introducing himself to Li, but just in case he used a fake name. He explained that it must be fate that they met like this, so they should form a party. Li introduced himself as well, and he expressed that he was happy to form a party with Quan. But he questioned if Quan really wanted to party with him. Quan started scratching behind his head again, and in an embarrassed tone, he expressed that he is a little bit embarrassed to say this. But he told Li that he is not great at using his stigma yet, so even though he awakened for more than a year he is still a 1 star. Star is a class, a type of level that starts at 1 star and continues all the way up to 12. Metahumans raise their level based on the stigma of their transcendent constellation. And although the power of a metahuman's stigma and constellation is important, being able to use the stigma is also important. Li was being hesitant, so Quan showed him the stigma on his chest. Seeing the stigma on Quan's chest, Li couldn't believe it. He thought he would never see the stigma of one of the 12 signs. Quan smiled. He made the stigma with a blade when he decided to go through with scamming people. It's a symbol he went through hell to make, so of course he expected it to have great results. Quan was having a good feeling about today, so he brought Li to a gate, and while in front of the gate Quan expressed that even though the gate is a low-ranking one, it's very competitive, so he asked Li if they should enter, and Li said yes. They entered the gate, and immediately they were met with monsters, and before Li started fighting, Quan expressed that he would cast a buff on Li. He brought his arms close to his chest, and the stigma began to glow. This was because he activated a mind LED. Quan spoke, "Star sign Aquarius, please brighten up the darkness for this lowly disciple." Afterwards he sprinkled glass powder mixed with fluorescent paint. Li expressed happily that this must be the power of Aquarius's stigma that he heard so much about. He grabbed his spear, and he explained that his body was getting warmer. It felt like every single one of his cells were awakening. Quan started laughing to himself quietly. He thought Li must have swallowed glass powder. Li thanked Quan for the buff, and he expressed that in return for the buff he will show off his skills. Li quickly rushed at the monsters, and as he slashed and diced, he explained in a happy tone that because of the buff his body was feeling much lighter. He had an unexpected enlightenment. Li finished off the monsters some time later, and he impressed Quan with his skill. Quan approached, and he told Li that he will recover the Mer crystals. Li was a lot better than the other metahumans that Quan scammed before, and at this rate he will earn a minimum of 300,000 won. Quan made his way over and he started collecting the Mer crystals. He held one in his hand, and he admired it. He couldn't let this, an item that can be infused with stigma power and is sold for a lot, fall into someone else's hand. Looking back to then, Quan thought he hit the jackpot. But little did he know, their surroundings were starting to get eerily quiet. Some time later Li called out to Quan in a shocked tone. Quan stood up, and he took a look around, seeing that they had been surrounded by monsters. Li took a defensive stance. He questioned why there was suddenly so many monsters, and Quan quickly took cover behind Li. The number of monsters continued to grow, so Li decided that it would be best if they ran away. The two ran with Li leading the way, and as they ran Quan looked back. He spent several years in these low-ranking gates, but he had never seen an abnormal amount of monsters before. This made him question why this is happening. They continued to run as fast as possible, however the monsters were fast, and they weren't able to put any distance between them and the monsters. Li looked back at Quan. He realized that if things continued at this rate then they both would die. Quan stared at Li questioning why he was looking at him like that, and suddenly Li proceeded to kick him. Quan fell to the ground and Li continued to run. He looked back with a distraught look on his face, while apologizing repeatedly to Quan. Quan shouted at Li, calling him a son of a bitch. Li continued to run away, and the monsters closed in on Quan. Li looked back once more, and he expressed that if he hadn't done that then the both of them would have died. Kwon shouted again, and he expressed that if that's the case then they should die together. At that moment an unexplainable situation occurred. Lee suddenly fell to the ground, while crying in pain. Kwon stared at him. He questioned why Lee was acting like this all of a sudden. Since Lee fell to the ground, Kwon approached him. He realized that Lee was dead, so he started searching Lee's body in case Lee had something useful on him. What he found was a strange stigma on Lee's chest. It was a stigma he had never seen before, so he observed the stigma while questioning if Lee wasn't a Pyxis. As he observed the stigma, he received a system message that informed him that the first enlightenment of the Black Heavens had started. This leads us to now as Kwon stares at this elegant beauty in front of him in a daze. From those manhwas, Kwon knows that a regressor is someone who goes back in time. However, it was hard for him to think about the past when his future 5 minutes will be him getting ripped to pieces by the Anthorns that were chasing him. To wrap his mind around this, Kwon turned his attention to Vega, and he recalled her telling him that he possesses a stigma that no one else possessed. He also now has a stigma on his chest that he had never seen before, and he was sure it belonged to Lee. He wasn't sure the reason or how it happened, but he used the power of the Black Heavens, and he absorbed the dead Lee's stigma. However, the stigma he absorbed was Lyra's, not Pyxis's. Then it hit him. Kwon turned his attention to Lee, realizing that Lee is the regressor Vega was looking for. He recalled the phenomenon where Lee's body started emitting blue-colored lightning. That phenomenon also happened to him when he absorbed the stigma. He came to the realization that Lee, who regressed, was killed by the stigma, and from that moment on the power of the Black Heavens activated and the stigma came to him. Vega grew tired of Kwon not responding to her question. She was sure she felt the heavenly star here, so she asked him again if he is a regressor, and Kwon replied saying she is right. He began to stand up from the ground. Kwon had no idea what the Black Heaven or Unheavenly is, and he doesn't even know the name of the goddess who is in front of him. But in order to survive, he needs to scam the goddess into believing that he is a regressor. He stood tall and he proclaimed proudly that he is the regressor that she was looking for. Vega glared at him with a skeptical look on her face, but shortly after, she crossed her arms, and with a smile, she expressed that she knew her intuition was correct. Kwon was shocked. He couldn't believe that she would believe him so easily. He stared at Vega with an awkward smile, and he thought about the fact that he is scamming a god, a transcendent being who possesses the power that a mere human could not even imagine of possessing. As he thought about this, he questioned if he wasn't going to get fucked up for this later. Vega expressed that she wanted to talk to Kwon about all the details of the future he went through, but she turned his attention to the Anthorns, and she says they were getting in the way. She smiled, and with her arms still crossed she told Kwon that she was looking forward to seeing the limits of the Unheavenly Star's power. Kwon turned his attention to the furious Anthorns, and he questioned if Vega was telling him to prove his power by fighting the monsters. With a sweaty face and a nervous smile, he told Vega that he would get rid of the monsters. He grabbed Lee's spear, and when he faced the monsters, he felt like his body was as light as a feather, and he calmed his nerves by telling himself that he now has the body of a metahuman, even though he is only 1 star. The monsters couldn't contain themselves any longer, and they pounced. Kwon remained calm, and he proceeded to cut through the monsters that pounced on him, leaving Vega shocked. Kwon continued to slice and dice the monsters. While he did this, he questioned why fighting Anthorns was so easy. He received a message from the system informing him that he has acquired Pyxis's Spear's Arts level 4, and Kwon's head began to hurt. Suddenly, a memory began to play in his head of a man in the midst of training. He saw a man bent over while using a spear to hold himself up. The man was breathing heavily, but he motivated himself by reminding himself that if he stopped here, he would never be able to catch up to Woo Hyuk. The man went back to training, and Kwon started to question if he was seeing Lee's memories right now, but he questioned this because the person in the memory had a scar that the Lee he was with moments ago did not. Judging by the scar, he guessed that these aren't memories of the past, but it must be memories from future Lee's timeline. Kwon held the spear up, mimicking the stance of Lee in the memories. He proceeded to use the moves he saw in the memory on the monsters. Along with Lee's memories, Pyxis's skills started to flow in Kwon's mind as well. But Kwon questioned if 1-star metahumans are supposed to be this strong. After defeating a good chunk of the monsters, he looked back at their corpses, shocked by his own power. The 1-star metahumans he remembered weren't this strong. Suddenly, as he was getting ready to finish the rest of the monsters, Vega stopped him. Kwon turned his attention to her, and she asked him if he was trying to put on a show for her entertainment. Kwon, with a confused look on his face, questioned what Vega means. Vega expressed that if he wasn't putting on a show, then he should use her stigma already. Kwon was in a state of disbelief. He questioned if Vega was saying that the entire time. He exerted that much power without using the stigma. As he was trying to come up with an excuse, Vega spoke, saying she understands what's going on here. She explained that it must be hard even for a regressor like Kwon to use a new stigma. She expressed that it must feel like stepping into a new body. Kwon stared at Vega with an awkward expression. He didn't even have to try to scam her, as she was justifying everything on her own. He couldn't let this opportunity pass him by, so with a confident expression, he told Vega that she was correct. Hearing this, Vega reached forth her hand, and she told Kwon that it's her job to help the baby with his first steps. This left Kwon in a state of confusion, and suddenly he received another message from the system that informed him that Vega blessed him with the blessing of a star. He received another message telling him that the blessing caused the proficiency of Lyra's stigma to be temporarily boosted, but Kwon was too deep in thought to notice this message. The message gave Kwon Vega's name, and he was deep in thought trying to figure out where he heard her name before. Suddenly he was struck by lightning, and Kwon with teary eyes shouted that he should at least be given a warning before something like this happens. He lifted the spear, and he activated the Blue Thunder skill by striking his spear on the ground. Lightning was discharged in the ground, wiping out all the remaining monsters. Kwon stared at the aftermath of his attack in a daze. He couldn't believe that he wiped out so many monsters with just a single attack. A mere 1-star metahuman isn't capable of something like this. A metahuman must have reached 2 stars or rather 3 stars for him to even imitate something like this. So Kwon was questioning what Lyra's stigma is for it to give a 1-star this much power. Kwon recalled the system's message which mentioned Vega's name. Vega, with a satisfactory smile on her face, expressed that Kwon is indeed a regressor, and she praised him for his remarkable learning speed. Kwon, with his back turned and his head lowered, called out Weaving Woman Star in a questioning voice. Vega placed her hand on her cheek and she questioned why Kwon was calling her. This sent shivers down Kwon's spine. He now realized that this was the real Vega. There are tens, no hundreds of constellations. Although they are all transcendent, even constellations are divided into those with greater and weaker authority, and the power of metahumans varies according to the rank of the constellation they receive their stigma from. Among the strongest constellations there are supreme beings that even the 12 zodiacs dare not look down on. Polaris, Deneb, and Vega. Vega is one of the highest ranking constellations. She is so far off in rank that the other constellations dare not raise their head in front of her. And that same constellation was right behind Kwon, not to mention he is trying to scam that high-ranking constellation right now. Vega called out to Kwon questioning if something was wrong. Kwon remained silent. He realized that he might be royally fucked. He held his head in a panic, questioning if he should tell her he is not a regressor and that he lied because he was scared of dying. He threw this idea away because the water was already under the bridge. A mere mortal ridiculing a god, there was no doubt in his mind that she would kill him right away if he came clean. He couldn't think of a way to get out of this with his life, so he decided to finish what he started. He approached Vega and he expressed that he has missed her greatly. The confused Vega questioned what Kwon was saying. Kwon grabbed Vega's hand and he put on an act. He forced tears down his face and he expressed sadly that he thought he would never see Vega again. He told her that it's such a relief to see her again. The perplexed Vega questioned the kind of relationship they had in the future. Kwon, continuing his sad act, expressed that he forgot she didn't have any memories of him right now. However, on the inside he was rejoicing, because his act seemed to be getting through to Vega. Kwon told Vega that she should forget he said anything. This made Vega more curious and she asked him to tell her about their relationship in the future. Kwon, with a heartfelt smile, placed his hand on his chest, and he expressed that he will tell her in the future. Vega took this as Kwon saying she would be annihilated in the future. She expressed that she knows all the constellations including her will eventually be devoured by the darkness of the black heavens as is destined. Kwon questioned what she meant by eventually devoured, however he continued to act like he knows shit, and he told Vega that the other constellations will indeed be devoured by the black heavens. But as he said this he realized something was amiss. He nervously asked Vega if she said the black heavens would devour the other constellations. And Vega expressed that Kwon is correct. She told him that if they let the master of the black heavens be, then the world will once again head towards destruction. Kwon started laughing and sweating nervously. He recalled the message from the system that informed him about the black heavens, and since the power he possessed has the same name as the one Vega mentioned, Kwon questioned if he is the one who is going to destroy the whole world. He continued his act, and he expressed to Vega that she shouldn't be worried because he came back in time. He took a knee, and right then and there he pledged to Vega that he will not allow her to be devoured by the black heavens. Vega reached forth her other hand and she called Kwon by name. Then she spoke, saying, "The unheavenly star who shall defy fate, she shall light up the painstaking path in front of Kwon with her starlight." She placed her hand on Kwon's forehead, and suddenly Kwon received multiple messages from the system. Kwon was informed that the Weaving Woman Star, Vega, had appointed him as an apostle, and the Black Heavens was absorbing the mana from the stigma. This allowed him to fulfill a part of the conditions required for the second blooming of the Black Heavens. After Vega shifted the conversation, she turned her attention to Lee's lifeless body, questioning who he was. Kwon expressed that she shouldn't be worried about it because this corpse belonged to an extremely wicked person who will loot innocent people in the future. Kwon didn't feel remorseful about Lee, because after all what Lee did to him was the essence of maliciousness. promise. Vega was impressed, and she felt a sense of pride that her newly appointed apostle that regressed was already cleansing the world of evildoers. Kwon smiled, and he expressed that he regressed for this reason. Then Vega shifts the conversation again. She informs Kwon that she had one last thing she wanted to tell him to keep in mind, but she was suddenly hit with a small electrical discharge. She told Kwon that she would like to talk more, but it seems the constraints of the commandments have started. Kwon stared at her with a confused expression on his face, and he questioned what she meant by constraints of the commandments. Vega explained that she blessed him earlier, and although it was indirectly, the action violated the commandments. She is basically a being bound by the commandments, which stops her from interfering with this world. She told Kwon that she would be leaving now, but she expressed that in a week, Kwon should come to the sanctuary where she resides, so they could continue their conversation there. After Vega disappeared, Kwon fell on his ass and he questioned what was happening. So much shit was happening one after the other that he might go mad if it continued. Even so, he couldn't believe that he attained the stigma of one of the North Star constellations. He felt his chest and he smiled while expressing that going mad isn't so bad. He turned his attention to Lee's corpse, and he expressed that his life took a U-turn thanks to Lee, so he thanked Lee. After exiting the gate, Kwon made his way to a fast food restaurant, and he purchased 2 big persets for 15,800 won. And as he made his way home, he held the bag up questioning why burgers were so expensive. When Kwon reached home, he quickly opened the door, and when he entered the house he announced that he was back. Hearing the rustling of Kwon taking off his shoes, a red-haired woman turned her attention to the door, and she questioned if that was Kwon. Kwon turned on the lights, he greeted the woman, and he announced that he had returned home. With a pleasant smile, the woman expressed that Kwon returned home later than usual. Kwon stared at her smile. This was Song Hyun, the woman who became his sole support within his hellish orphanage life. Hyun lifted her hand, and with 2 fingers sticking out, she expressed with a cheeky smile that if Kwon was home, he should have hurried and given her a cigarette. Kwon, with an irritable look, stared at her questioning why she was saying bullshit when he just came home. Hyun asked Kwon if he should be talking to his goddess Nuna like that. Kwon reached into the bag he was carrying and questioned why Hyun considered herself his Nuna. Hyun explained that she is 2 years older than Kwon, so that automatically makes her qualified to be his Nuna. Kwon then placed one of the burgers he bought in Hyun's hands, and he guided her hands as she took a bite of the burger. Hyun was a metahuman, but she's lost her right leg, and she is blind in both eyes. As a result, Kwon is now the person who is looking after her, unlike when they were younger. But still, their persistent relationship that has continued since their time in the orphanage carried on even after they left that place, although now it's precarious and messy. After taking a bite, Hyun questioned what the burger was. This confused Kwon, and he stared at her questioning what she meant. With a pleasant smile, Hyun questioned why the burger was so good, and Kwon quickly explained that the burger was so delicious because he got it from a restaurant, not some frozen patty. This led to Hyun shouting at him. She questioned if he was hurt somewhere or if a monster hit him in the head. To calm her down, Kwon expressed that he bought the burgers because he got some money. Hyun reminded him that the reason they don't buy these types of things isn't because they don't have money. This left Kwon reflecting on his goal. Kwon was saving all the money he earns because there's something he needs to buy at all costs. He stared at Hyun, and he noticed that she had some crumbs on her cheek, so he pointed this out to her. However, he didn't tell her where it was. Hyun turned to him, and she asked him if he wasn't going to tell her where it was. Kwon smiled. He handed her the drink that came with the burgers, and he told her jokingly to just eat, since to him she is ugly whether there was crumb on her mouth or not. He told her that from now on he will buy her big persets instead of frozen meals. He also told her that the burger set he bought is called a big perset. As Lee was explaining, Hyun listened with her attention turned to him. She interrupted him, saying something must have happened to him. Kwon, realizing that he couldn't hide anything from Hyun, told her that he became a metahuman. Hyun dropped the drink Kwon had handed to her in shock, creating a mess, and she asked him to repeat what he just said. The scene then shifts to a playground, and while on the swings, Kwon took a deep breath in. He finally had some free time to himself. He tilted his head up, and he closed his eyes. It was already late in the night because he had to explain things to Hyun, but it made sense to him that she would be this surprised. He left out the part about the constellation as he didn't know how to tell Hyun that he was scamming a god into thinking he was a regressor. Since he finally had some free time, Kwon decided to organize his thoughts one at a time. He opened his status window to tackle the first thing he wanted to tackle, which was the Black Heavens. Kwon checked the innate ability list of the Black Heavens, and he learned that the Black Heaven is in the 1-star enlightenment state. The abilities of the Black Heavens are Stigma Absorption, which absorbs the mana of a stigma and stores it inside of the Black Heavens. The second skill was Black Curtain, which completely conceals the energy of the Black Heavens. It can also be used on the stigma that possesses this ability as well. The third ability was Inheritance. This ability reads the information recorded in the stigma. This skill receives influence in accordance with the stage of enlightenment of the Black Heavens. Lee then proceeded to check the current stigmas he possessed, and the first was Lyra's stigma, which was designated as the representative stigma. Black Heaven is a mysterious power that absorbed Lee's Lyra stigma. Kwon knows that Black Heavens is originally unrelated to Lee's regression, and he was sure that he had it before he met Lee. Vega told him that the being who possessed Black Heavens would bring the future world to ruin. If so, that means the future Kwon is the one who brought the world into ruin. Kwon scratched his head trying to figure out what happened to him in Lee's first life. He was now certain that he couldn't get caught no matter what. If the truth about him having the Black Heavens comes out, it will also be revealed to Vega that he is not actually a regressor, but a third party who absorbed a regressor's stigma. He stared at the Black Heavens information on the system window, and he questioned why he was given something like this. He laid back on the swings, putting all of this aside. The biggest question he has right now is, what do I do now? He looked up into the sky questioning what he could do to appear more like a regressor. If he is able to receive Vega's acknowledgement, then he won't be suspected, and to receive Vega's acknowledgement, he needs to hurry and raise the star level of the Lyra stigma. By next week before meeting Vega, he concluded that he needs to be at least a 2-star. Lee placed his hand on the chest with the stigma. He was already overflowing with mana, so what's left is the ability to handle the stigma, and he concluded that he should head to a gate tomorrow. He was satisfied with this plan, so he decided to head back so he could sleep. He stepped down from the swings, and as he was heading back he received a notification on his phone. Kwon checked the message, and he learnt that there is an abnormality outbreak in a gate. There is also a possibility of a mutant appearing. Kwon quickly recognized that this was the gate he went into today. Kwon knew that Anthrons traveling in groups made no sense, and now he was able to confirm that it was indeed an abnormality. The possibility of a mutant caught his attention. Mutants refers to monsters who mutate ever so often. Depending on the situation, there are cases where they are weaker than their original forms, but typically, the mutated forms tends to be much stronger than their original forms. Mutants are monsters that 1-star metahumans cannot dare to overcome. Looking back to when he was in the gate, Kwon was puzzled because he didn't see any mutants back then, so he questioned if he missed it. However, he realized that he wasn't in the position to be worried about finding a mutant monster. With a grim smile, he concluded that this gate would be his destination. The next day at the gate, a lot of metahumans had gathered, and at the portal they began to announce their star level and constellation they acquired their stigma from, in hopes of forming a party. Kwon was puzzled by this. He was sure the news said to avoid coming here for the time being, but there were more people than usual. He questioned if this was because the mutants Mer crystal sells for a lot of money. Kwon was thinking about joining a party, but after some thought he became certain that he could face a mutant by himself. He also didn't want to split the profits with a party member, so he decided to enter the gate alone. When he entered the gate, Kwon made his way through a dense forest hoping for Anthrons to attack him. A short while later he noticed that a couple of Anthrons were stalking him from a distance. The Anthrons rushed at him, and Kwon quickly took out the spear he stole from the dead Lee. One of the Anthrons quickly moved behind Kwon, but as he was going for a bite, Kwon hit the monster's snout with the bottom of the spear. Another Anthron jumped at him to take a bite of his face. Kwon moved back slightly, dodging the Anthron's attack, and in the process he was also able to grab hold of the Anthron's leg. With the Anthron's leg in hand, Kwon looked down to see that the first Anthron that attacked was trying to sneak away. He questioned where the Anthron was going, and he expressed that if they were going to come at him like this, then they should have been prepared to pay the price. He stomped the first Anthron that attacked, and he threw the other one into the remaining Anthrons that were standing back. The throw was so strong that the Anthron's body was sent flying through the forest, leaving behind a trail of devastation. Kwon stared at his hand in a daze. His physical specs are on a completely different level compared to the typical 1-star metahuman. Kwon was dumbfounded as he stared at the aftermath of him throwing the Anthron. The body of an Anthron usually weighs around 80 kilograms, and it's not easy to grab and throw one with one hand. He quickly made his way over to the corpses, and as he gathered the Anthron's Mer crystal, he questioned how much he would get for Anthron Mer crystal. He harvested one of the Anthron's Mer crystals. He lifted the crystal towards the sun, and he watched it as it glistened in the light. From what he recalls, the Mer crystal he had in his hand should sell for 800,000 won. Kwon now understands why everyone wants to become a metahuman. After harvesting the remaining Mer crystal, he stood up, and he prepared to continue looking for the mutant. He noticed that something was staring at him with a murderous gaze, so he turned his head in that direction, questioning if more Anthrons came after smelling the scent of their friend's blood. The Anthrons were joined this time by a giant Anthron, and from its size and aura, Kwon concluded that it must be the mutant mentioned on the news. The mutant Anthron rushed at Kwon. Kwon was taken aback. He questioned if the mutant was really going to attack him directly, and as the mutant closed in on him, he questioned if the mutant lost its sense of fear while mutating. Kwon drew his spear back, and in a cold tone, he expressed that he would hit the spear back into the mutant. He activated the Thunderbolt skill level 1, and he threw the spear at the mutant. The attack wiped out everything in its path, including the mutant. Kwon stood there in a daze, and he stared at the dead mutant's body, questioning if his attack worked. Seeing that the mutant had been defeated, the other Anthrons quickly ran away. Seeing the Anthrons running away, Kwon called out, expressing that if they were going to run, they should at least spit out mer crystals before leaving. As he was preparing to chase after the Anthrons, he was stopped by a message from the system. He learnt through the message that the Lyra's stigma had reached 2 stars. Kwon stared at his hand. He did expect to level up faster because of the amount of mana flowing from the stigma, but the fact that he reached 2 stars in just 1 day left him in a daze. He was feeling the power surge from becoming a 2-star flow through him, and since he achieved his goal, he approached the mutant so he could harvest it quickly and head back. As he was harvesting the mutant Anthron, he was approached by 2 men. The 2 men questioned if Kwon was able to capture the mutant all by himself. Hearing this, Kwon turned his attention to the 2 men. One of the 2 men, who had closed eyes, was quite surprised by this, and he expressed that Kwon must be quite skilled for him to be able to catch a mutant all on his own. The other man told Kwon that they are 3-star disciples of the Cain's Venetisai. Kwon stared at them with a skeptical look. He was certain that there is no way 3-star metahumans would come to a low-ranking gate like this one. He questioned if maybe they were here specifically for the mutant. But the fact that the 2 men had faces that screamed thief was off-putting to him. In fact, he thought it would be a crime on its own if they weren't robbers. The man with closed eyes expressed that something is strange. He turned to his party member, and he said the Anthrons look like the ones they lost sight of earlier. The other one replied saying, "Oh, so that's what happened," and he expressed to Kwon that this isn't good. After hearing this, Kwon was now convinced that these 2 men were a couple of thieves. The 2 men started smiling and giggling. After seeing their arrogant smiles, Kwon decided that he no longer had a choice. He dropped to his knees, and he started apologizing for stealing their prey. He expressed that he didn't know. Kwon's sudden brazen apology took the 2 men by surprise. But before they could get their bearing, Kwon continued on saying he would give them all of the mer crystals. The man that had his hair in a bun expressed with a perplexed look on his face that it seems Kwon was quick to understand the situation. He pointed towards the denser part of the forest they were in, and he asked Kwon to follow him so they could talk more over there. The 2 men turned their backs to Kwon and they started heading in the direction they pointed. Using this opportunity, Kwon stabbed the man with the bun in the back. And with a menacing smile, he told the man with the bun that he should tell his mother in hell that he said hi. The man with closed eyes watched in a daze as his party member fell to the ground while coughing up blood. He rushed at Kwon while screaming, "I will make you pay, you crazy bastard." The man with closed eyes swung his spear. Kwon was able to dodge, and he moved behind the man. Kwon was much faster than the man expected. He opened his eyes, and he called Kwon a son of a bitch for hiding his real skills. Kwon, with an evil grin on his face, asked the men in a surprised tone if he and the other guy were just weak idiots. He stabbed the man, and he electrocuted him with the Thunderbolt skill. After dealing with these 2, Kwon took a deep breath in. He finally had some quiet time again, which means he could go back to farming. As he was looking through the 2 men's things, he noticed that the guy with the bun had a stigma, and after thinking about it, Kwon remembered that Black Heavens is supposed to get stronger as it absorbs more stigmas. He stared at the man's glowing chest while questioning if he should give it a try. It would be bad for him if someone like Vega were to find out. But he remembered that one of the skills of the Black Heavens was Black Curtain, so he decided to give it a try. He approached the guy with a bun and he placed his hand on the man's stigma. A black smoke mixed with lightning particles started emitting from his hands, and shortly after he received a message from the system telling him that Black Heavens was absorbing Cain's Venetisai's stigma. With this, Kwon fulfilled all requirements to unlock the 2nd level of Black Heavens, and quickly after this message, another one appeared that informed him that Black Heaven was beginning the 2nd enlightenment. Kwon was hit with a wave of pain that traveled throughout his entire body. While this was happening, he received a message from the system, telling him that Black Heavens was starting to read the records of Lyra's stigma, but because the enlightenment level of Black Heaven was low, the amount of records that can be read is restricted. The system started recalling some restricted records of the metahuman Lee. The records started playing in Kwon's head like a movie. In this playback, he saw Lee waking up in a hospital. Lee turned to the person who was beside him. He questioned how long he was out for. The man informed Lee that he had been passed out for 2 weeks. Lee questioned if he had really been out for that long, and the man expressed that he had. The man with a slightly irritated look asked Lee why he entered a gate without telling anyone beforehand. Lee lowered his head, and he apologized to the man. Woo-hyuk, he explained that he thought it would be okay since it was only a 1-star gate. Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted by a woman, who referred to Woo-hyuk as Guild Master. The lady asked Woo-hyuk if he had some time. Woo-hyuk turned to her wondering what she had to tell him. The lady asked Wu Hyuk if he remembered the new gate that opened in Mokdong on the 15th. She reported that apparently Chang Hyun found a holy relic there, but she expressed that Chang Hyun said something was a bit strange about the relic. The record that was playing in Kwon's head suddenly got distorted, and he came back to his senses. As he was gathering his bearings, Kwon was slightly irritated that he kept seeing memories of Lee. Suddenly, he received 3 messages from the system. The first message informed him that partial records of Lee had been successfully inherited. The second one informed him that Pike's spear arts went from level 4 to level 5. And the third informed him that he learnt the skill Lame Excuses. This skill was already level 2. Kwon stared at the 3 prompts that had appeared in front of him with a confused look on his face. He questioned if he will gain more of Lee's memories the more enlightened he becomes. He also wondered what the skill Lame Excuses. He recalled in the memory that the lady said a new gate would appear in Mokdong on the 15th, and that there would be a holy relic. A holy relic is an artifact that has concentrated powers of the stars within. Some relics contain so much power that it closes the gap of a 1-star and 2-star. Kwon quickly summarized the information in his head. He smiled menacingly. This was great information. Plus, he will be able to use it to his advantage more than just for the holy relic. After exiting the gate, he made his way to the Metahuman Association building, and at the front desk he traded in his Mer crystals for money. The receptionist informed him that currently the purchase rate for Mer crystals is 1,440,000 won, which comes out to 1,152,000 won after tax deduction. Kwon, without knowing, blurted out "fuck." Surprised, the receptionist asked him to repeat what he just said, and Kwon replied saying it was nothing. In his head, Kwon cursed the 20% tax, and he expressed that they were robbing him. He calmed down a little after realizing that it's not as bad as it could get. He was given a ticket with a number, and after waiting for some time, Kwon's ticket number was called. Kwon approached the same receptionist again, and when he got to the front desk, she asked him for the constellation he is associated with. Kwon told her that he is associated with Lyra. This left the receptionist stunned. She apologized and she asked him to repeat what he just said one more time. Kwon, with an irritable look on his face, repeated that he is associated with Lyra, and he even spelled it out for her. Hearing it for the second time left her speechless. Kwon was starting to get annoyed, and he asked her if she could hurry up. This snapped the receptionist out of the daze, and she asked Kwon to follow her. Kwon followed the receptionist. He sorta expected her reaction, and although it would be nice to just smurf around for the sake of his own convenience in the future, Kwon knows that would be stupid, since fame is power after all. The receptionist brought Kwon to a VIP room, and she asked him to wait there for a bit. When Kwon entered the VIP room, he saw someone that was sitting on a couch with his legs on the table. The blonde man had an annoyed look on his face, and he questioned why Kwon was staring at him. Blondie told Kwon to turn his gaze towards the ground. This irritated Kwon, and he wondered who this person was for him to be so rude. Kwon guessed that Blondie must be here for the registration exam like him, so he decided to forget about him as it wouldn't be worth the trouble, and instead he turned his attention to the snacks that were laid out on the table. Kwon couldn't believe his eyes. He stared at the snacks, questioning if they were only for VIPs. His mouth began to drool, and he questioned if all those snacks were free. He was so jealous of the bastards who luxuriously ate these types of snacks back when he was a scammer. Kwon was having a hard time holding himself back, but after more glances at the food he convinced himself that he shouldn't hold back. He quickly sat down and he started stuffing his face. Kwon couldn't stop himself. All the snacks were so fucking delicious that his hands kept bringing food up to his face. Seeing Kwon munching left Blondie speechless. Kwon was finally able to stop himself for a moment, and as he swallowed the food in his mouth he thought about packing up what's left of the snacks and taking it with him. He giggled to himself as he thought about how happy the snacks would make Hyun. Blondie interrupted Kwon's happy time by asking if he was a beggar. This question took Kwon by surprise. He stared at Blondie, and he made note of the fact that Blondie was still sitting comfortably like he owned the place. Blondie, with an irritable look, asked Kwon why he keeps smacking his lips while he eats. He expressed that the noise is making him lose his appetite. Kwon also got comfortable. He sighed, and he expressed that Blondie is quite the daring guy. He spoke with a confident smile, saying it's good to see how youngins these days are full of energy, so much so that they act recklessly without thinking of the consequences. Blondie, with a skeptical look on his face, questioned why Kwon was saying nonsense, and he asked if Kwon went crazy while eating. Kwon replied with a question. He asked if a child like Blondie knows who he is. Blondie was perplexed. He questioned who Kwon was. Kwon started laughing. He expressed that he wasn't active lately and this was the result. He leaned in, and with his hands interlocked he expressed that if Blondie is in the VIP room then he should know who he is. Blondie was taken aback. He stared at Kwon, questioning who he was. Seeing how confident Kwon is, made Blondie conclude that he must be someone famous whose face is well known. Blondie noted that Kwon was also speaking in a tone that resembles an old man. Blondie thought about this for a second, and an old person came to mind. but Kwon was too young to match the person he thought of. And after thinking about it further, he remembered hearing about something like this before. Once you pass being a 9-star metahuman, there are cases where your body gets younger. And he noted that Kwon was someone who was guided to the VIP room just like him. Kwon, still speaking in the tone of an elderly man, asked what guild Blondie belonged to. Blondie started speaking, but he was stuttering. Kwon interrupted him. He expressed that Blondie should watch his words. This confused Blondie, and he stared at Kwon with a perplexed look on his face. Kwon replied in an intimidating tone, and he reminded Blondie that he has been speaking informally to him since earlier. Blondie thought to himself that he fucked up. He quickly bowed, and he expressed in a formal tone that he is Park Youngwoo of the Pandanus Guild. Kwon knows that the Pandanus Guild is one of the top 10 guilds in Korea and the Guild of the Scorpio Metahumans, but he continued his act, and he spoke saying, "Ah, that's Chanhyuk's guild." Youngwoo looked up, and he questioned if Kwon knew his guild master. Kwon didn't know Chanhyuk, but he acted like he did. He expressed with a reminiscent smile that back in his day, he and Chanhyuk ate together, went to saunas together, and did everything together. Youngwoo quickly lowered his head again, and he started sweating nervously. Kwon added that young bastard, Chanhyuk, has become a respectable guild master in his absence. Kwon expressed that maybe he should have drinks with Chanhyuk soon. He asked Youngwoo if he can give his regards to that bastard Chanhyuk later. Youngwoo replied attentively that he can, and he asked Kwon who he should say the regards are from. Kwon told Youngwoo to say that it's from Kwon Jin-oh. After hearing Kwon's name, Youngwoo dropped to his knees, and he apologized for not recognizing such a noble character, and for being rude. Kwon turned his head as he couldn't stop himself from smiling any longer. He has been scamming for several years. A guy like this is way too easy for him. After getting his giggles out, he told Youngwoo not to worry about it, since young fellows often make mistakes. However, Youngwoo couldn't accept this as he had made a big mistake. Using this opportunity, Kwon asked Youngwoo if he could do him a favor then, and Youngwoo replied passionately that he will do whatever Kwon wants him to do. Sometime later, Youngwoo had packed all of the snacks in the VIP room neatly into bags. Afterwards, he informed Kwon that he was done, and he stood to the side with his hands behind his back, and he reported to Kwon that he even gathered the refreshments in the refrigerator. Kwon praised Youngwoo for his work, and with a smile, he thought about how surprised Hyun will be when she sees all these snacks. Then Youngwoo told Kwon that he will be heading back for now. This took Kwon by surprise, and he questioned if Youngwoo wasn't here for the registration exam. Youngwoo bowed his head again, and he explained that he is leaving because he doesn't feel so good. He headed towards the door, and before he exited he bowed his head one more time, and he expressed that he wished Kwon well. Kwon wished Youngwoo a goodbye, and after Youngwoo closed the door behind him, Kwon with a menacing smile expressed happily that he had chased away the nuisance. And afterward he took out Youngwoo's wallet that he stole earlier, and he started searching it to see how much Youngwoo was carrying. To his surprise, Youngwoo was carrying a lot of cash with him. But something else quickly caught his attention. It was a mutant's Mer crystal. Kwon took the Mer crystal out of the wallet, and he questioned why something like this was in a wallet. Not only are mutants very rare, a mutant's Mer crystal is not something that can be obtained easily. He stared at the Mer crystal, questioning why Youngwoo was carrying this randomly in his wallet. Kwon noted that he should look into this more, and at that moment there was a knock on the VIP room door. Kwon turned to the door, questioning who it was. A man opened the door to the VIP room, and the man apologized for making Kwon wait for a long time. The man entered the room, and as he approached Kwon he introduced himself as Han Junman, the team leader of the Special Disaster Security Management Association's Disaster Countermeasures headquarters. And he asked Kwon if he is the person with Lyra's stigma. Junman reached forth his hand for a handshake, and Kwon shook his hands while looking up awkwardly. He expressed that he is the person with Lyra's stigma. Kwon made note of Junman's impressive physique. Not only did Junman have a strong physique, Kwon could tell from his aura that he is strong in ways that are incomparable to someone like Youngwoo. Curious, Kwon asked Junman for his constellation, and Junman told him that he is a Taurus 6-star metahuman. Kwon was impressed. Junman is a 6-star Taurus, one of the 12 astrological signs, which means he is truly someone that is incredible. Junman stared at Kwon with a skeptical look on his face, and he asked Kwon if it's really true that he has Lyra's stigma. Kwon quickly realized that Junman was having a hard time believing him, but he expected this as he is the first metahuman to receive Viga's stigma. He lifted his shirt and he showed Junman his stigma. However, Junman was still skeptical. He asked Kwon if he would be okay with him conducting the registration exams himself. Kwon was taken aback, and he questioned if it was really necessary for Junman, the team leader, to do the exam himself. He thought about it, and shortly after he decided to let Junman test him. The scene then shifts to a gym, and we see Kwon with his spear and Junman with boxing gloves on. Kwon turned to Junman, and he asked if it's really okay for him to use his spear instead of a sparring weapon. Junman, with a blissful smile, expressed that there shouldn't be a problem. Kwon went to his corner, and he pointed his spear at Junman. Junman was a 6-star metahuman, and honestly Kwon was curious about something. Even if Lyra's stigma is really OP, he questioned if it can fill the gap of 4 stars, and that of a metahuman who has one of the stigmas of one of the 12 astrological signs. This was something Kwon really wanted to know, and he quickly rushed at Junman, and as he swung his spear, he released an electric skill. Junman blocked the attack, but he couldn't believe that a 2-star metahuman was this powerful. And as he was trying to wrap his mind around this, Kwon pulled back his spear and he prepared to attack again with a lightning skill. However, in the brief moment Kwon was activating his skill, Junman saw an opening, and using this opportunity he punched Kwon, and he sent him flying into a wall. Kwon could barely stand up on his own after this attack, and he had to use the spear to help. He couldn't believe that Junman's punch had that much power behind it. However, he could still continue. Junman quickly ran over and he asked Kwon if he was okay. Kwon said he was fine. He stood up and he pointed his spear at Junman again, and he expressed that they should continue. Without a doubt, Junman was on a different level from those Kwon has faced so far, and he quickly realized that using thrusting attacks won't work anymore. Junman took a defensive stance and Kwon quickly rushed at him, aiming for an upward slash. Junman kicked the base of the spear to deflect Kwon's attack, and it caused him to lose control of his spear, but Kwon was expecting Junman to do this instead of dodging, and he planned to use this opening to his advantage. He appeared behind Junman and he grabbed his spear while it was still in the air. Then he struck Junman with a lightning attack. Kwon started getting excited by the battle. It felt like something was surging within him, and he wanted to push a little more. He received a message from the system. The message informed him that the skill lightning has become level 2. But Kwon was too immersed in the battle to notice. He pushed Junman back with another lightning attack. Junman couldn't believe it. Kwon was getting stronger as the battle went on. Kwon didn't give Junman a chance to rest. He rushed in for another attack, but instead of playing defensive, Junman also went on the offensive. Before Kwon could land his attack, Junman activated his stigma, and he landed a punch on Kwon's jaw. As Kwon's body was flying through the sky, Junman realized that he used way too much power, and after the dust cleared, Kwon laid there and Junam called out to him. But after seeing that Kwon was unresponsive, he made his way over while calling out for a medic. Sometime later we see Kwon drinking a potion. Junman, who was relieved, expressed that it seems Kwon wasn't injured severely. Kwon was also relieved. He turned his attention to the potion bottle he just drank, and he nervously questioned if those types of potions aren't really expensive. They should be at least 10 million won. Suddenly Junman interrupted his thinking. He bowed, and he expressed how sorry he was about the situation. Kwon with a satisfied smile expressed that it's fine, even though he couldn't beat Junman. He was satisfied since he was able to get a 6-star metahuman to use his stigma. Kwon then asked Junman if this means they were done with the test, and Junman replied saying the test was over. Junman observed Kwon as he was getting up with a serious expression on his face. Kwon, Vega's star apostle, was way more incredible than Junman imagined. He called out to Kwon, and after he got his attention, he expressed that he knows he shouldn't be saying this after that huge mistake he just made, but he asked Kwon if he could have a moment with him anyways. Kwon was confused, however he agreed. And some time later, we see the two in Junman's office. Junman asked Kwon to join the association. Kwon was slow to respond, so Junman added that it would be of great benefit if he joined the association. Kwon picked up the cup of tea that was on the table. He realized that Junman was trying to recruit him. Kwon thought about this deeply. Just being an apostle of a North Star means his value can increase easily, and it's better for him not to join any organizations and be a mercenary. He also didn't want any restrictions of what he does or where he goes, since he doesn't know what he needs to do in order to act more like a regressor. He took a sip of the tea and he placed it back on the table. He expressed to Junman that it will be tough for him to join any organizations, and after this he got up to take his leave. Junman stopped him, and he explained that Kwon can join the association, but he doesn't have to show up for work. Kwon seemed interested, so Junman continued explaining that even though he doesn't show up to work, Kwon will still get paid a monthly salary. He expressed that it would be much less than those large guilds are offering, but Kwon would have freedom with his time. Kwon started questioning if he could really get money without having to do anything. He sat back down in the chair and he asked Junman to elaborate. Junman explained to Kwon that he will only belong to the association by name, but he can do all the mercenary work he wants. In fact, the association could recommend him for work. Kwon was intrigued. His mouth began to drool, and he questioned if this wasn't a total jackpot. He would get paid a salary without having to work, and if he has the association on his side, he won't need to be concerned about cutting them a share when he takes on requests. He questioned if this wasn't totally insane, but thought to himself that he needs to act totally charismatic here. If he agreed to it easily, it wouldn't look good. He turned his head, and he covered his mouth to mask his smile, and he told Junman that he is still not sure, so he needs some time to think about it. All his life Kwon lived like a dog, but that's not the case anymore. Now he is becoming a master. Junmin expressed that on top of everything he just mentioned, Kwon will be excused from paying taxes. Kwon let his excitement slip and he started barking like a dog. He expressed that he will live as a dog of the association from now on. Kwon quickly got his excitement under control, and he expressed in a serious tone that what he meant just now is that he looks forward to working with the association. Junmin was left speechless, and a few days later we see Kwon walking in the streets. He recalled Vega telling him to come and look for her in her sanctum in a week's time. And much to Kwon's annoyance that time has come. He made thorough preparations, but he was still nervous. As he walked, something caught his attention. By the gates leading to the sanctum, there were hundreds of people praying to the constellations to bestow them a stigma. Kwon walked by while observing them. He did hear that there are a lot of people begging to become a metahuman in front of sanctums, but it was understandable since in a tough time like this there aren't many ways people could survive other than becoming a metahuman. He made his way over to the sanctum gate, and to his surprise it was really big. This made him question if there were really hundreds of these things all over the world. But he realized that this isn't important right now, and he decided to head in. Inside he was mesmerized by the beauty of a sanctum. The sanctum looked like a tree with its branches branching out, and to Kwon it was as if this tree was made of the Milky Way. He stopped admiring the sanctum, and he decided to go find Vega. A short while later he found her. Kwon approached Vega, and he expressed that he missed her greatly. This left Vega speechless, and she started blushing. To mask this fact, Vega crossed her arms. Kwon placed his hand on his chest, and he apologized. He expressed that he blurted that out without thinking. In his head, Kwon praised himself, and he motivated himself to keep up the kind of act that says, "I met you in the past and I've got a story that I can't tell you about." Vega calmed herself down, and she expressed that it seems Kwon's faith is still not in place. She reminded him that she is not a lover that he remembers. Kwon expressed bashfully that in his memories Vega has always been this beautiful. Vega started blushing again. She expressed bashfully that even if Kwon flatters her like this, there's nothing she can do for him. Kwon decided to stop for now as he was happy with his start. Vega calmed herself down again and she checked Kwon's progress. She was impressed that Kwon was able to reach 2 stars in just 1 week. Kwon expressed proudly that it wasn't a big deal since he did this before in his previous life. Vega then asked him to tell her about the future. She expressed that in order for her to help him she needs to know what happens in the future. Kwon started sweating nervously, and after gathering himself, he told Vega that in the near future the existence known as the Heavenly Demon will appear. Vega was surprised, and she questioned who the Heavenly Demon is. Again Kwon started sweating nervously. He made up that name by taking the demon and heavens out of the demon that possesses the black heavens. Vega spoke, saying Kwon must be referring to the Heavenly Demon who possesses the black heavens. Kwon told Vega that she is correct, but he expressed that the Heavenly Demon hid himself very well so no one knows his face, name or whether he's even human. Vega was taken aback. She questioned if not even Kwon, a regressor, knows. Kwon told Vega that he doesn't. He expressed that he tried to find information on that as soon as he regressed, but he failed to do so. Vega thought this was strange. If Kwon used the Star of Oaths to regress, that means he killed the Black Heaven's owner, so she questioned if Kwon was not able to see the Black Heaven's owner's face despite having killed him. Kwon was puzzled. He thought to himself, questioning what the fuck a Star of Oaths is. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video then hit the like button.